Thank you. This is CVE Unmoored, implications of removing the technology requirement within the CVE rules. Going to briefly give an overview of who I am, and then differences between the old and new rules. And then I'm going to have a guessing game where we're going to guess whether or not something should get a CVE under the new rules. And I'll ask for a show of hands for that. So who am I? I am Jonathan Evans, a curator on the GitHub Advisory Database at GitHub. So I publish advisories for security issues, and I also assign CVE IDs to vulnerabilities within repositories on GitHub. Before that, I was on the CVE team at MITRE for 10 years. So the old rules said that you could only assign a CVE ID if the vulnerability was not customer controlled, if you were the provider of that service. If you didn't own the service or the product was not customer controlled, then you could not assign a CVE ID. Right? Couple of reasons for this. One is vulnerabilities in services just generally didn't need anybody to actually take an action on it because the person who owned it already did and fixed it for everybody. Right? The other reason is practical, that MITRE used to be the only one who did all the assignments. And when this rule was originally created, MITRE could not tell whether or not the vulnerability was actually the result of the service or some dependency that service was using. So they could not say this was actually a new vulnerability. Right? The new rules specifically say no technology requirements. People wanted to be able to assign CVE IDs to vulnerabilities in cloud vulnerabilities and AI vulnerabilities. So they made this change, right? The new rules specifically emphasize that the CNA needs to use their own judgment on whether or not a CVE is appropriate. Right. And then according to the rules, if there's a vulnerability-like thing and there's a consensus around it, then that vulnerability-like things should get added to the rules. All right. So I'm going to run through some scenarios and ask for whether or not it should get a CVE. All right. So a content distribution network has a buffer overflow in the code that leaks its server memory to its users. Does this get a CVE? Show of hands. All right. Looks like people agree. Yep. That's your cloud scenario. This rule was specifically changed so that you could assign a CVE ID to that. Right? Attacker is able to bypass the deepfake protections in AI services. We have mixed opinions here. I say no. And there is a blog post on AI guidance that CVE recently put out. Talks about, they specifically emphasize this particular rule on basically, there was a rule, essentially vulnerability scanners, if they miss something, like you can't expect them to get everything. And this kind of falls into that category. Right. So you're saying, you're asking whether or not there's a consensus against assigning this. And I would argue that yes, there is an AI working group within the CVE. I believe he chairs it. And yes, that is a developing consensus, I would say. All right. A university's custom student portal has a SQL injection in it, right? So their custom website has a SQL injection. Does that get a CVE? Yeah. right? Yep, that gets a CV, right? It's a service like every other one. So basically everybody's websites can now have CVEs, which can significantly expand the number of CVs that can be issued. I don't think researchers have figured that out yet. A vulnerability in a website caused by a common plugin. Does that get a CV? Yeah, that's traditional. So yeah, we should get, or maybe not. Maybe if I'm a researcher, I'm not going to do that. Maybe I'll just go report the vulnerability in every single website that uses the plugin and not tell MITRE. And how would MITRE know that it's in the plugin and not the website? So something to think about. Right? Resonance of a music video causes the device to malfunction. Should that get a CVE? So official rules now say that is not something that can get a CVE. Now, old rules would allow that to actually get a CVE, but this officially says physical attacks should not get vulnerabilities. Yeah, unless the product specifically says it protects against that. Right? So what about a padlock? What if you can bypass it because it has a weak spring? Should that get a CVE? No? No. So technically it can, right? If they make security claims that they're protecting you against access, it can get a CVE. Right? There's that last part on there that says, unless they make a claim. Right? An attacker can impersonate the victim in order to port out the victim's phone number to attacker's phone. Yes? Any no's? All right. We have some no's there. So this is actually something like there's nothing that says no. And there's actually a rule out here that says socio-technical, technological, and other changes over time may be considered vulnerabilities. So this is a maybe. Now, it does say exercise judgment, and I might exercise my judgment and say no, but it's definitely something that can get a CV. Right. What about radio jamming is used to disable a military drone? Does that get a CV? Yeses? Raise your hand. No? No's? No. There's a specific rule that says jamming radio frequency spectrum should not get a CVE. Apparently that's lumped in with other brute force attacks, which also don't get CVEs. All right. What about, let's say, pickle scan, which is designed to specifically detect pickle attacks? What if it misses it because the object's using pip.main? Does that get a CVE? We have some yeses, we have some no's. This one actually got one. So says it should not unless it explicitly claims to detect the pattern and fails to do so. So pickle scan asked for a CVE, so we gave him one. Right. Mistakes in GitHub action scripts leads to secret exposure. These are in your CI/CD. They don't actually touch the actual package, but there is an actual vulnerability in your CI/CD that will leak your secrets. Does that get a CV? Yes? No's? All right, it is mixed. This is a yes. This is basically just like a service, right? There's no technological requirement. It is very much a sort of gray zone, similar to the services. And so, this can get a CVE, which our security lab at GitHub found a bunch of these before the rule change. So those don't have them, but the new ones can. All right, let's say we have an actual biological based, RNA based computer and somebody creates a virus for that. Can that get a CVE? Yeses. We have some yeses. Nos. We have some nos. Yeah, maybe. um, so, if there is a real biological based computer, maybe that falls into one of those socio-technical, technological changes that should get a CV. Maybe, like, I'm not sure about that one. On the other hand, you could consider it a physical attack, and physical attacks do not get CVs. So, all right. Let's say there's a tamper-proof seal on a physical Bitcoin that can be bypassed by pressing down the seal and feeling the key. This is something when I was at MITRE, I actually got asked for. So yeses? Nos? All right. Yeah, there's tamper-proof seal, right? They're making a claim that you can't tamper with it, right? You bypass the tamper-proof, so it gets a CVE. It did not at the time, though. All right, let's say someone sees the internet prompts to send PII and any prompt to them, which are then used in training data in an LLM. So we have our chair of the AI working group saying, no, this is not. So who wants to say yes? Anybody? How about no? Oh, we got one. No's? Okay. Yeah, I went with no here as well. Right. The package has a typo in the name it uses for a dependency, and the package for that typo is not in the name, not in that registry. Should that get a CV? We have some yeses. How about no's? Yep, that one got a CV. That's a real thing as well. All right. Using the noises from hardware to extract the encryption key. Yeses? No's? All right, so it's mixed. Normally, like I would consider this a physical attack, and no, but the software maintainer disagreed and wanted a CV, so we gave it to it, right? A lot of these rules say should, and so there's always that exception of you can, but most of the time you shouldn't. Right? Quantum computing can now break all of your hash mechanisms and encryption and all that. Should that get CVE? Yeses? So the question is it just the existence of quantum computing, or is it your application that's using the encryption that can now be broken? That is a very good question. At which level you would put it? You could also do it at the encryption protocol or standard level. But it's one of those. I would put it at the system level or the standard level. So yeses? No's? Oh, more no's than yeses. Yeah, that definitely gets a CVE. Oh, I know. It is not good. Yeah. And this is one of the things that is one of those technological changes that is actually the main reason why that rule is in there, is because over time, a lot of these encryptions have been broken, and at one time they were safe and would not have been considered vulnerability. Later on, they're considered unsafe and are a vulnerability. Right. New car model has a problem with the pedal that sometimes sticks and causes uncontrollable acceleration. Yeses? Any no's? One no? This is a safety issue, not a security issue. There's no attacker that can cause that. It's just random. Right. Now, if you could, present an attack vector where that happens, right? If it doesn't matter if it's not controlled by an attacker, right? Right. All elevators of the same model share the same key to bypass their floor access restrictions. So it lets you bypass the floor access restrictions to go to whatever floor you want. Yeses? All right, yes. No's? All right. So, yep, I would consider this no. Insecure default configurations should be considered, but aren't required. And almost every single place requires that there be that key, so that emergency services can actually get up the floors. All right, and those are the scenarios I wanted to go over. So if you have concerns about any changes, have any ideas on how to improve the rules, there is a GitHub repo that you can make comments and suggestions. Are there any questions?
You'll see a theme here. The first question is, has GitHub or will GitHub begin testing physical locks to issue CVEs against them? Second question, is there or will there be a CVE for bird flu, let's say?
So,
or perhaps lab generated. And thirdly, it seems like the new rules could lead to a proliferation of CVEs about a broad range of topics outside of the software that we typically look at. Will there be filters around managing who's looking at what for physical locks and bird flu and repos and so on?
yep. So GitHub is definitely not going to, because we're open source. That is our scope. Locks would be outside of our scope. As far as bird flu thing, again, that's, bird flu is a physical attack if it is actually created by a human, right? Again. So I think that might be outside the scope. Now, is there ways of filtering things? One of the things that was implemented for assigning CVIDs for cloud services is there is a tag that you can add to the CV records for, I think it's something like solely hosted service, something like that. That would allow you to be able to filter on that. Will there need to be tags for things like hardware? Possibly, if we see more adoption of it.
So I got two questions. One is, how much of a burden do you think is going to put on the CNA of last resort effort?
I think it could kill it. Yeah, this is one of the main concerns I had when the new rules were implemented, was that if you start assigning CVIDs to vulnerabilities in individual websites, that could get MITRE flooded, and MITRE's not prepared for that. And having worked at MITRE, I was very happy to have that rule in there. It was insistent that it be in there so that we wouldn't kill the system. But now that's there, I kind of want to, raise awareness that there is this issue. Maybe we want to preemptively be concerned about it. One of the things I've suggested is that MITRE create its own policy where it may scope out that particular issue. If some other CNA of last resort wants to take up it, maybe the board could, allow that to happen.
The other thing is, do you think they're going to look at the standard again and, I guess, requalify what is a physical attack now? Because, technically electrons and stuff are physical, radio waves are physical things. They are, where do we draw that line of what's a physical attack now?
I think that's where you start using your judgment, right? I think that's part of it. The physical attack rules, part of those were intentionally put in because I think the Intel people were very upset about some of the physical attacks. And so they put in rules that if you're intentionally bypassing, some securities in the physical packaging, then, it's not considered a vulnerability and things like that. So.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, that was tough. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Appreciate it.